Before I played Lost Planet 3, I had heard it wasn't great, that it was the worst of the trilogy, but I thought that maybe they were exaggerating, or that it wasn't that bad. After playing the game, however, I could safely say that this game is the worst of the trilogy. But also, it just doesn't understand what makes a Lost Planet game special. So what makes a Lost Planet game a Lost Planet game? I would say there are a few key points. Satisfying quick gunplay, mechs, otherwise known as versus suits, lots of varied and cool Acrid, and over-the-top action. Lost Planet 3 fails to do any of these things well. First point, the gunplay. In Lost Planet 1, and especially 2, you are constantly moving, constantly blasting away at enemies. It's almost like a Dynasty Warriors game, except you have a machine gun, and you're constantly moving to avoid enemy fire. There are very few things to distract you from this gameplay loop, except for raising checkpoints. Because of this, it has a pretty unique game feel when compared to other third-person shooters of the time, where a lot of third-person shooters had a cover system and you couldn't be nearly as aggressive. For this example, I'll be using Uncharted Drake's Fortune as my reference. In that game, if you ran at enemies instead of using the cover, you'd be turned to Swiss cheese. You just can't tank that many bullets, so you would use cover to give you some reprieve and work your way through enemies. That's where the fun is in that system, adapting to enemy positioning by changing cover to give you an advantage. Of course, if there are only a few enemies, you could go in guns blazing, but you just can't fight 10 or more enemies at once like you would in Lost Planet. So which system does Lost Planet 3 use? They go with the slower system. There are quite a few areas where there is no cover and you use dodge rolls to avoid certain attacks, but in areas like the abandoned buildings and when you have to fight humans, cover is a necessity or else you'll get shredded by gunfire. The game is also much slower paced, and going from the fast pace of Lost Planet 2 to the slower pace of Lost Planet 3 is like going 120 miles per hour in an F1 car and then immediately stopping. Something isn't going to feel quite right. Also, remember how earlier I mentioned how there were very few distractions in Lost Planet 1 and 2's gameplay? Well, there are constant interruptions in Lost Planet 3. In between the combat sections, there tends to be times you need to repair things with your rig, because in this game, you're not a soldier, you're essentially a construction worker. There will be a little mini game. This can range from needing to spin the left stick to the left, moving your right stick over the cracks in a pipe to weld it, or moving both sticks to make red circles blue. It's thrilling stuff. But you might argue, oh, it's just something to give the player something to do to split up the action. And you're right. These moments aren't very fun, but you are right, except for the fact a few of the enemies have quick-time events they can force you into, to halt the gameplay to a crawl, as now you have to mash X, a common occurrence in this game, and move the cursor over the thing attacking you and press X some more. These moments are incredibly easy. I never failed one of them once, and all they do is annoy the player. The next thing that makes the Lost Planet game special are the mechs. So how are mechs used in this game? There are no mechs. See, the game is a prequel, so I guess the people at Spark Unlimited decided, since this is a prequel, we don't need the mechs. Or they decided the industrial rig would be good enough. Well, it's not. See, there are a few key differences between the rig and the mechs. 1. The rig is not fun to use in combat. It's just waiting for the right trigger prompt so you can block a move and punish. While the fatalities you do to the Acrid are cool, they don't justify the boring gameplay of press right trigger, press left bumper, then hold right bumper. That is how every single large Acrid fight goes. This leads into my next point of quality versus quantity. See, you might think that only needing to program one rig versus the previous game's 8+, that the rig would do a lot. And they were on the right track. See, over the course of the game, the rig can be upgraded or get new abilities. However, these upgrades range from neat to basically useless. There are extra combos, but these don't do anything because you only need the right trigger to deal with the big boys. And the smaller Acrid, you could just walk on or press square to smack them. There are some added abilities like the blowtorch. The blowtorch is used once in the main story and never again. The winch arm, this is useful as it is used for traversal and is good for dealing with flying enemies. And the shock grabber, this allows you to surge electricity through the claw. It's used in some quote-unquote puzzles where you have to press the left stick to activate a machine. On the whole, none of these upgrades besides the winch do much of anything. They might have use in the side quests, but I didn't do them, and you may argue, if you're going to review the game, you should do the side quests. I would argue that if I have no interest in doing the side quests because of how boring the main game is, then that says a lot about the game itself. Back on the topic of quality versus quantity, the only way that works is if the quality is better than the quantity. In this case, the rig versus the mech in previous games. And, well, the rig doesn't have nearly enough quality to compete with the previous game's quantity. Honestly, the rig not having guns really hurts its quality, as in previous games, even if you're using the same model of of mech, you could have different weapons leading to an inherent variety. The rig just can't compete with the variety of different mechs in the previous games, and the rig isn't fun to pilot, just putting more salt into the wound. Now it's time to talk about the Akrid in this game. Some of the designs are cool, like this cat thing, but a lot of the designs are meh, like the scorpion, this kinda crab, and actual facehuggers from Alien. Like, the only difference between the two is the color scheme and the Akrid has teeth. However, the enemy variety in this game is garbage. You mostly fight these grunts, and you'll sometimes get their ranged variants. There's also the flying wasps and the holes in the walls. These enemies you'll generally encounter in outside areas or caves. However, when you enter abandoned buildings, there are only 2 enemies you find there that aren't mini-bosses. Those being the facehugger, which have the QTE grabs I mentioned earlier, and the one-eyed bugs that can fire spikes. Does that sound unique? A bit different from what we've seen? Well, you're correct. They are new. However, these things are just a stand-in for enemy soldiers. They have a rapid-fire projectile that you need to take cover for or take a lot of damage, a melee attack, and they will use cover. The only difference between the bugs and the soldiers you fight later is the fact that they also have the QTE grab. So the only 2 enemies you find in these buildings both have annoying QTEs attached to them. Oh joy! The Akrid in general in this game aren't very fun to fight either. Their designs aren't bizarre or cool enough to leave a lasting impact, and the Akrid in this game don't really do anything cool or memorable to stand out from the Akrid in the past games. However, the biggest issue I have with the Akrid in this game is how they treated the G-Class Akrid. These Akrid are the big boys, the showstoppers that stick in your mind years later, like Gordian, Akrid X, and Red Eyes. So how are they used in this game? Well, I said they, but what I should have said was it. There's only 1 G-Class Akrid you fight in this game. Yes, you heard that right. One of the main reasons people buy these games, the massive boss battles, was nearly removed entirely. So how is this one fight? It's lame. You shoot at its head while dodging some swipes at its tongue and dealing with the facehuggers it spawns. This would be fine if you did it once. But no, you do the same cycle 3 times, then you fight a 4th time in the rig to kill it. The G-Class doesn't have that much of a spectacle to it either. Like, sure, it's big, but there isn't a lot to this boss that makes it special or memorable. It looks like a Metroid boss, and you fight it like a lot of Metroid bosses. Smack it in the weak spot until it dies, except Metroid bosses tend to be fun to fight. Now, some of you might be saying, but what about Nushi? Sure, it is a G-Class, but you don't fight Nushi. Nushi is a stage where you fight a dude in a military rig. Saying Nushi is a G-Class you fight is like saying there are 4 Xenoblade characters in Smash: Shulk, Pyra, Mythra, and Grandpa! This game is also missing the over-the-top action the previous games had. Lost Planet 3 has nothing close to moments like... or... and nothing at all close to... And this isn't some exaggeration. There were no extremely cool scenes that had me in awe like there were in Lost Planet 1, or especially Lost Planet 2. That may not seem like a big deal, but Lost Planet 1 and 2 are like watching an 80s action movie. Sure, there isn't a ton of deep meaning or anything like that, but there's so much cool action happening that I don't care. However, Lost Planet 3 is like watching an action movie and you only get 30 seconds of action. It's not even very good action. However, maybe this is because Lost Planet 3 took a different approach, making the game much more story and character driven, like Lost Planet 1, but much less over the top. So that's what I want to discuss next, the story. So we play as Nicolas Cage doing his best MacReady cosplay, otherwise known as Jim. His deal is that he decided to work on EDN3 as a rig operator to make money for his family back home. We work at a base trying to figure out a solution to the energy crisis on Earth by using thermal energy. The story is pretty basic and not something to buy the game for, and have a few problems with it, but first, the positives. I appreciate that Jim and his wife Grace send recordings of each other to each other as they can't call each other. And through these recordings, you see that they love each other, which is important when trying to make your audience understand what Jim is sacrificing when working on this planet. If she was incredibly annoying and naggy, then the player would think, wait, why is Jim risking life and limb for this garbage? But no, you understand their connection and why Jim misses her. The other thing I thought was pretty good in the story was Phil Braddock. He starts as a normal boss, he is serious, but you could tell he isn't evil or anything like that. However, something important you learn is that not only was his dad on EDN 3 to try and do the same mission Braddock is doing now, but even later, Braddock learns that his dad left the crew he was with to save Braddock and his mom. And in the scene, you could tell that knowledge deeply affects Braddock. You could tell he feels a weird kind of guilt that his dad stranded his crew on this murder planet to save him. Later on, when Nevik are on the planet, the company Braddock's dad worked for, he decides to help Jim with his plan to stop Nevik from coming back to the planet to harvest their resources. As turns out, those people Braddock's dad stranded survived and have formed their own base and are surviving. So to help Jim in his mission, Braddock sacrifices himself to blow up the Nevik base as a way to atone for his father's sins. It isn't Shakespeare, but it's better than what I expected from this game. Now on to the bad. First, this game has a lot of filler, stuff that could have easily been cut and not missed, like repairing the breaker, anchoring these pillars, spinning the stick to the left. I don't know where else to talk about this, so I'll say it here. This game is bland looking. With the exception of the survivor's base and the inside of Nushi, every area is a mix of blue, white, and black. I could not name a single area's name. Speaking of bland, most of the other characters in this game were either bland, one note, or annoying. There is not a whole lot done to make me want to care about these characters. There are 3 cutscenes in this game showing that this game is being told from the perspective of Jim talking to his granddaughter about what he did in the past and how he made some big mistake. Now, this is spoiler territory, so on screen will be the timestamp to skip this part if you don't want to be spoiled. Okay, good? So anyways, at the end of the game, you get the 3rd fast forward and Jim dies. And the granddaughter's like, "I'll fight for you, Dad," and heads out of the cave. So my question about these scenes is, why are they here? The granddaughter deciding to fight doesn't mean a whole lot as this is a prequel, and she isn't an established character in the story of the other games, so these scenes end up feeling pointless as they don't lead to anything. An easy solution to this would be to make the daughter Luca from Lost Planet 1. Sure, she would stick out a bit with her pink hair, but this would explain her motivation to fight in Lost Planet 1. But no, this is practically filler besides showing Jim is mortal. However, the biggest grievance in this game relates to the big mistake Jim made: how Nushi is handled. So Nushi is a big ol' acre that makes pure T energy, the stuff used to heal people in later games. Yeah, instead of an in-lore reason for healing like in Lost Planet 1 and 2, Wayne is apparently a descendant of Wolverine. Anywho, Nushi is a pretty big deal, and makes the pure T energy, and it creates enough we could end the crisis on Earth. Shame it dies. Not joking, Nushi during the final battle dies. See, the villain, Caleb, wants to use Nushi to control the acre and save the Earth. Wait, why are we stopping him? I feel like I missed something, because to me, it seems like Caleb's plan was to use Nushi to get T energy and save the Earth, but we decide we don't care about Earth anymore and stop his plan. I think it's either implied or said that Nevik would basically make a monopoly, but as far as I recall, there isn't a particular reason why we want to stop him besides he's the bad guy. Anyway, we're fighting him on Nushi's heart, and we have set up a drill to Nushi's heart to activate the Acrid living in Nushi to attack Caleb. But this backfires because we end up accidentally killing Nushi, so we have lost the one way to get pure T energy. What now? Oh, don't worry. Minutes later, it's explained that we invented the T harmonizer so we could turn thermal energy into pure T energy, completely getting rid of the whole point of Nushi. And it's not like these things are hard to make. We see in Lost Planet 1 and 2 that these things are mass-produced, completely getting rid of the whole idea of how will we survive without Nushi. Overall, this game isn't technically bad, but it's far from good. This game is one of the most boring sequels ever made. You could cut it out of the franchise and no one would miss it. It also doesn't help that this game sold very poorly. The weird part is the fact that if this game wasn't a Lost Planet game, it would probably have been forgotten. But because of the fact that it is a Lost Planet game, it's remembered. Funny how that works. Anyway, don't get this game. It isn't worth your time.